Hello everybody, my name is Welcome.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the most useless video essay of all time. Imagine this, if you will. It's the good Lord's year of 2017. Shape of You by Ed Sheeran is on every radio known to man. Jake Paul and Logan Paul have divided the nation, and the 2017 YouTube Rewind was almost as bad as 2018's in the fact that everyone instantly forgot it. Now, if any of you were born in 2005, like me, you were probably around 12 to 13 in 2017 and in middle school. Yikes. I don't know about you, but the only thing that got me through that shit was the escapism of the internet and YouTube. Now, the most popular form of content on YouTube at this time was definitely gaming. I think that that's kind of been a standard all the time, but during this era, big time, at its peak. Now, the legends of this genre, the ones who stood at the top of the pillar, were PewDiePie, Jacksepticeye, and Markiplier. Basically just 3 random straight guys, or straight that we know of. YouTube provided access to practically every video imaginable and a gateway to new content that had never been seen before, especially not by my childhood eyes. Jesus Christ, there was so much crap on YouTube. Now, I personally was never that big of a PewDiePie fan, and I watched some of Jack's videos, mainly just gameplays that I was really interested in, but Markiplier. Bro, I was a freak. Obsessed. Fangirl, middle school obsessed, like a boy band, but no, it's just some random guy that makes gameplay videos on YouTube. But it wasn't just the gameplays. I was deeply invested in everything this man made, embarrassingly so. And one of these creations was a very long, very complicated web of lore that spanned over many videos and many years. And I'm gonna explain it all. I know it all. 13-year-old me knew it all, and I'm gonna explain it to you now so it lives on and I can get this torturous information out of my head. That's right, boys. Today I will be explaining to you Before we officially begin, I need to explain why I cite 2017 as the date of interest. Although the most prominent characters in the Markiplier lore, that being Wilford, Warstash, and Darkiplier, both kind of first appeared in 2012, I believe it wasn't really until 2017 that they became fully fledged characters and not just little Easter egg personas. To me, the story begins with the creation of a choose-your-own-adventure dating simulator called A Date with Markiplier. Now, if you don't know how these choose-your-own-adventure things work, it's pretty simple. It's just like how at the end of a YouTube video, you'll be recommended something to watch next, and they'll just show up as, the next videos, and you can click on them. It's like that. But at the end of each path, you'll be prompted with 2 options, which are titled as your options, and they lead you down a chain of those types of videos. You know. A Date with Markiplier was posted on February 14th of 2017, which is appropriately Valentine's Day. This is why I note 2017, because this is the first time that we see Wilford and Darkiplier appear in a story as actual characters and not just personalities. Although Darkiplier is the more well-known persona, Wilford was actually the first. His character was even inspired by Mark's YouTube profile picture featuring a pink mustache. Wilford appeared across many of Mark's early videos in 2012, usually as a comedic interviewer with a goofy voice, pink mustache, and sometimes pink suspenders. Editor Ren here. I know I said that he appeared across many early videos in 2012. That's not true. He appears for the first time in 2012, and then he appeared more regularly in 2013. 2013 is what I was thinking of. Don't trust anything I say, I'm a fucking liar, apparently. The second of Mark's main personas, Darkiplier, also appeared in 2012. This was when Mark made an ominous 17-second video called Don't Blink, in which he is just sitting at his chair staring into nothingness, and in the darkness, a weird evil, dark version of his face slowly emerges. Then in 2016, Mark made a 14 million subscriber special video in which Darkiplier shows up and beats the shit out of him. Both of these characters kind of started as channel inside jokes, but I believe 2017 is when they really became more than that. Wilfred's appearance in Date with Markiplier is brief and not super important, so we'll start with that. After stumbling down countless routes and options, you will eventually be presented with the choice between exit and more. If you choose exit, you kind of just end up in a dead-end time loop, but more brings you to a strange encounter with Wilfred where he asks you ominous questions and implies that time has ceased to exist. This is not the first time that Wilfred, as, either a persona or a character, has acted strange or otherworldly, but it is the first time that he has interacted with the viewer directly. This ending concludes with Wilfred implying that you are not who you think you are, and then you turn to a mirror where you see that you are Chica, Mark's dog. It's funny, it's classic, I love it. But A Date with Markiplier is where the lore of Darkiplier really began. Following the choice path of pay in the very beginning, you will then be prompted between choosing a romance movie and a horror movie. If you choose the romance movie, your date continues as usual and you can go down different paths. But if you choose the horror option, it's called Dark Mark. Wonder what that leads to. You will go in, sit down, and then Mark disappears. And the stage distorts and slowly zooms away, and you are face to face with Darkiplier. In the 14 million subscriber special that I mentioned earlier, Darkiplier has started to kind of have his defining features with like the tie and the dark eyeliner and all that. But in A Date with Markiplier, he appears in his most iconic form with the black and white suit, again eyeliner, and a blue and red glow kind of surrounding him. In this strange and ominous interaction with Darkiplier, he says things like,
"Did you miss me? I miss you very much. I've been waiting a long time to see you again."
This implies that there's some background that we're missing to his character, or that you as a viewer and Darkiplier have met before. He seems to speak about Mark as a separate person, as someone who's been pushing him aside or pushing him down, much like a alternate personality. At the end of this, he gives you 4 options, 3 of which are old videos that Mark had made that were similar to Don't Blink. Don't Blink was actually one of them. And this is important because it implies that Darkiplier was kind of present in all of these videos. The 4th option is entitled Freedom, and of course, that's probably the option that you would pick. If you choose this option, you are then seated at the opposite end of a table from Darkiplier, where he says things like,
"I've been waiting a long time to get some personal time between us. There's nothing you or he can do to stop me."
The last line that he says, I believe, is actually very important, and you should hold on to it even though we're not going to bring it back up for a long, long time.
"Now that we're here together, we can really get to know each other. Just need to let me in."
Ominous as hell, I know, but please, please remember it. Or I might make a callback to it. Who knows? This is going to be a really long video. But just then, Mark bursts in with a gun and starts beating up Darkiplier, and then in the quarrel, he drops the gun and you pick it up. Then you're prompted with the option to choose to shoot the mark on the right or the mark on the left. If you shoot the one on the right, your date continues as normal again with a seemingly just Mark. But if you choose the one on the left, Darkiplier apparently traps you forever. This ending is mostly comedic and kind of a play on that Yandere-like obsession thing that was kind of prominent at this time. But much of that beginning dialogue is important, and I do think that it foreshadowed a lot of that story that Mark wanted to build on later on. When I first watched A Date with Markiplier, Wilfred and Darkiplier were just kind of like thrown in Easter eggs that most people didn't really read that much into. You could easily make conclusions that the reason why Darkiplier acts so familiar with you is because he's recognizing you as a viewer from those earlier videos, and that Wilfred was just there to add in a bit of menacing fun. Generally, there wasn't that much to go on, and people didn't read that much into it. It wasn't until Who Killed Markiplier came out that people really started to piece together the true story. Okay, Buckle up, because this is where most of the lore comes from, and it is a lot. When I was writing the script for this section, I was thanking God that 13-year-old me did all the work of taking notes on the practically 12-hour live stream that I watched explaining all of this, so that I could just watch it and recap what I apparently already know. Before I jump into the story of Who Killed Markiplier, let me outline what this little series was about and what it means to the lore. Who Killed Markiplier sought to mirror many classic whodunits like Clue, but with that same first-person filming style that made A Date with Markiplier so unique and fun. The main three characters are played by Mark himself, that being Damien, the mayor, William, the colonel, and Mark, also known as Actor Mark. Who Killed Markiplier is essentially a massive lore dump of the origins of Darkiplier and Wilfred Warfstash's characters. Because of this is where the story and the timeline really begins. We open on a creepy, spooky mansion made marginally less creepy by the fact that you can totally tell the outside shots are taken during the day. You, as the first-person viewer, are seemingly invited to this party put on by Actor Mark. You are greeted at the door by Colonel William, who introduces himself to you, and by the butler, who takes your invitation. As you hand over said invitation, you can make out the words District Attorney written across it. When you walk in, Damien, the mayor, instantly approaches you and calls you old friend. You can kind of assume from this interaction that you have been invited because you are a friend of Damien. Walking through this intro sequence, you run into three characters: the butler, the detective, and the chef. Basically, it's a classic Clue character setup. Finally, Actor Mark, the one who put on this party to begin with, descends the stairs and makes a grand speech about enjoying the party and enjoying life in general. Specifically, he says the phrase, "life is for the living," which is an important phrase to remember for later on.
So drink up and be merry. Life is for the living.
He ends the speech with very obvious foreshadowing, saying,
And who knows? I could be dead tomorrow.
The viewer takes a drink and we cut to a very interesting montage of all of the characters drunk and partying. This is actually the most important cutscene in the whole series, but I can't really explain what any of it means until the very end, but I'll lay out basically what happens in it. We begin with a view of the poker table. The detective is walking around just kind of jokingly pointing fingers at people. The viewer is flipping Mark off in a game of poker and everyone looks pissed that he won. Damien is being held upside down for a keg stand and everyone is taking their shots with ping pong balls seemingly in some sort of drinking game. Cutting back to the poker table, William is showing everyone his cards, and the detective is now pointing at you and looking angry. Then we see William and the detective fighting. Now, William is loading a gun while Mark, or seemingly Damien, stands nearby. William first points the gun at the detective. Then cutting back to the poker table again, Mark seems to be calmly making a play at the table. Now William is pointing the gun at his own head. Finally, the detective who has been aggressively getting closer to you during this whole sequence punches you out, and the only person who comes to your aid is Damien. That concludes my basic explanation of the drunk sequence, but I think that you can kind of guess from a lot of those actions that there's some pretty big foreshadowing there. The next morning, when you wake up, you are greeted at the door by Damien, who reminisces on the fun of the night and how it reminds him of good old college days. But he admits that he feels kind of suspicious of why they were all invited to this party in the first place. He mentions that it's nice to have the gang back together, although it all feels rather sudden.
Still not exactly sure as to what we're supposed to be celebrating here. I mean, it's good to have the gang back together, but out of the blue like this seems...
During this conversation, he also mentions his own version of a life motto, saying,
Life is ours to choose, as I always say.
This is kind of similar to Mark's "life is for the living" phrase that he said earlier, but it is really different in reality. When you descend the stairs and enter the living room, you discover Mark's dead body. Instantly, everyone is in the room, shocked and horrified, but the detective is on it. Butler offhandedly mentions that the body is cold and seems to have been dead for a while.
The body's cold. He's been dead a while.
Maybe it's been dead longer than you think. The detective makes you his new partner, which has unfortunate foreshadowing because he says that all of his past partners died in tragic ways. Damien enters the crime scene appalled and wondering who could possibly do this, and then leaves quickly looking for William. Notably, William was actually the only one not at the crime scene in the morning. The detective deduces that he was killed around 1:30 a.m. and then says that he needs you to poke around and see if you can piece together any information that would tell you what has happened. The viewer then walks up to a door off to the side left slightly ajar where you can hear Damien and William arguing loudly. Damien accuses William of apathy and seemingly not caring that his friend is dead.
I know you hated him, but God damn it, he reached out to you.
Oh, what do you want from me, man?
Well, I want you to care.
William is just dismissive of all of this, and Damien barges out of the room. You then enter to talk to William. He gives a mocking interpretation of what he thinks happened last night, exaggerating Mark's greed and shallowness and assuming that he just drunkenly fell down the stairs. You can totally tell his story is driven out of anger, and he simply brushes you off as well. Back in the hallway, the butler beckons for you to follow him because he has something to show you. He plays that up a bunch and you're expecting some big reveal or some clue, where he takes you down to the cellar to reveal that it is simply a broken wine bottle in the basement.
Master would be so displeased if only he were still alive!
This is kind of just a funny and useless scene, but it does reveal that someone was in the cellar that night. Next, you run into the chef who wants to show you some hidden camera footage that would prove his innocence. He shows you a recording from a few months ago where Mark is meeting with the detective. You hear that Mark wanted him to look into the background of all the workers at the mansion and that the detective reports that they are all clean. The chef shows you this to prove that he is clean and not a killer, but there is some importance to the fact that we see Mark and the detective meeting months earlier. After this, you go outside to find Damien, who is still upset over William's lack of emotion. He explains that he, Mark, and William had been friends since they were kids, and that explains why he said the phrase, "getting the gang back together," earlier. Suddenly, the detective appears to call you inside, and as you are walking back in, you turn to see Wilford on an upper balcony, apparently observing the conversation you had with Damien. You return inside to find that the body has gone missing. End of chapter 1. Okay, I hope that wasn't too much because we still have 3 more chapters to go. But first, let's just recap some of the important things that we learned from this first chapter. Now we know that Mark, Damien, and William were all childhood friends who had some sort of falling out and that William still holds some resentment over it. The reason for the party in particular is unclear, and Damien seems most concerned about the whole situation. We know Mark has been killed by someone in the house, and it is up to you, the viewer, to figure out who it is. William is acting weird and dismissive with everyone, and at the end, the body has gone missing. Basically, this first chapter acts as an introduction to all the characters, like the beginning of Clue, and gives you a lot of foreshadowing for the things to come. Alright, with all that in mind, let's jump into chapter 2. Entering to find the body missing, everyone is rightfully shocked about its disappearance, but William makes more jokes, saying that he would have loved to have the privilege of killing him again if the body simply got up and walked away. The detective tells you to walk with him while he voices questions and thoughts aloud. He also questions why the party happened in the first place and suggests that it might have been some sort of ruse. He actually tells you that him and Mark have been friends for years until Mark just suddenly went quiet. Maybe this is around the time that Mark, Damien, and William supposedly split up. Important to note that although Mark and the detective were friends, Damien and William did not know the detective. As he continues on, he explains to you what Mark's body suffered before death.
Discovered that in addition to being stabbed 37 times, he was also poisoned, beaten, strangled, drowned, and shot in that order.
Now actually, this is one of the most important pieces of information that the detective gives you because only one of these things actually killed him. You and the detective arrive at Mark's room and you are prompted to search his belongings. On a side table, you find 4 important photographs. The first is of Mark, Damien, and William together laughing. The second is the 3 men again, but this time Mark is laughing with a woman we will later find out is named Celine, while Damien looks uncomfortable and William looks mad. In the third photo, William and Celine are gone, and Mark and Damien both look upset. The fourth and final photo is of William alone, and it is smashed. Let's pause for a second and analyze these pictures. We can assume the first photo shows the 3 of them together happy, like it used to be. But in the second, Mark is laughing with a woman that, again, we will later know is Celine, who is actually Damien's sister. According to Mark's breakdown, the real Mark, I mean, both actor Mark and William were interested in Celine, but Mark was apparently the one who got to her first. This explains why William looks angry and Damien looks upset in the second photo. The third photo shows us where things clearly got messier, as William and Celine are now missing and both Damien and Mark are upset. Referencing real Mark's scene breakdown again, he tells us that this is where William and Celine apparently ran off together behind actor Mark's back. The final photo of William alone is assumed to have been smashed by Mark out of anger over this situation. Basically, these photos explain the series of events that led to the gang breaking up in the first place. Okay, back to the story as intended. William suddenly appears in the room and beckons you to take a walk with him. An important detail to note here is that when you walk with William, you start on the second floor of the building, but then he simply opens a door and suddenly you are on the first floor. It seems that things don't make sense in this house. If you watch the whole series more critically, it seems that a lot of characters seem to teleport in and out of rooms or spaces, but William is the most obvious about it. William goes on and on to talk about his thoughts on the murder, once again dismissing the seriousness and suggesting Mark's workers may have played a part in his death. It's in this conversation that we hear William's version of a life's motto, which is, "Life needs a bit of madness."
Ah, life needs a bit of madness, eh, chap?
This completes the circle of mottos shared between the three men. Mark's is, "Life is for the living," Damien's is, "Life is ours to choose," and William's is, "Life needs a bit of madness." Suddenly, William is distracted and he runs off to a golf course down below just as Damien comes outside to look for him. He voices his distrust of the detective, saying that he's the outside party in this situation and that he trusts that you and William were not involved. Damien trusts William completely despite his strange behavior over the murder. All of a sudden, a gunshot is heard from inside the house and you and Damien rush back to find out what is happening. You find William and the detective pointing guns at each other, each accusing the other of murder. William is particularly enraged by being called a killer and says,
Not be called a murderer in my own home!
Again, we will refer to real Mark's scene breakdown here. This line is meant to refer to William's familiarity with the house and that he likely spent a lot of time there with Mark. To quote real Mark, this shows that all three of them were close, but Mark and William were like brothers. Just before it seems like one of them may shoot, Celine bursts in through the front door. End of chapter 2! Once again, there is a whole shitload of information here. But now we're starting to get some clarity on the relationship between Mark, Damien, and William and where their tensions lie. There are 3 main details to remember from this chapter. Number 1, the detective determined Mark's body suffered stabbing, poisoning, beating, strangling, and drowning before eventually dying of a gunshot. Number 2, the 4 photographs found in Mark's room show us why the 3 friends broke up in the first place. And number 3, that William had a strong familiarity with the mansion and was almost closer to Mark than Damien was. Now Celine is here and things are going to get even more interesting. Yes, I got a haircut. No, I do not want to talk about what happened to my bangs. So, Celine enters and immediately questions everyone about what's going on. They explain that Mark has been murdered, and she is rightfully shocked and very upset by this news. She ominously tells them not to say the word murder in the house and that there is something going on that is beyond their control. Real Mark explains that he wanted Celine's character to be a seer of some kind or someone who experiments in the arcane arts, and that's why she immediately takes control of the situation. She even proposes that they commune with the dead in order to get answers from Mark himself. Everyone is against this, but William stands up for her, saying that he trusts Celine with all his heart. This of course makes sense now that we know they had a romantic history together. Celine storms off, prepared to set up for the ritual anyways, but Damien follows her. He is concerned that she is actually more emotional about this than she lets on, and offers his help. In the breakdown, Real Mark has said that his concern was that of a sibling, and that he was shocked that she was not more emotional about the situation, considering that she and Mark were married. Knowing that they were a husband and wife and not just boyfriend-girlfriend or some sort of fling definitely adds to more of the reason why Mark was so upset with William running off with her. Regardless, Celine brushes Damien off and actually asks for your help in the ritual. Notably, she says that she believes Mark's death is just a small part of a larger scheme and that she has always felt uncomfortable in the house. As she performs said ritual, you see flashes of characters and interactions that have happened earlier in the series, but you do see one scene in particular of an old man with a shovel that you have not seen before. Celine tells you to draw what you saw, but becomes frustrated when she can't understand your drawing and tells you to go back. Hearing the commotion, the rest of the group bursts in and is mad at Celine for performing the ritual without them knowing. The detective drags you away and Damien stays behind to talk to Celine alone. The detective shows your drawing of the man with the shovel to the butler, who suspects that it could be a reference to their groundskeeper, George. You, the butler, the detective, and the chef all go outside to find this groundskeeper, while William stays in his room and Damien and Celine stay behind to talk. You find George outside keeping the ground, as a groundskeeper does, and he is very unfazed by the detective's heavy questioning, even with a gun. Based on his nonchalant behavior, it is very obvious that George is not involved, but the detective asks him to come inside for more questions anyways. To this, George says that he hasn't been inside the house in 15 years and doesn't plan on going in now. He does, however, mention that he will go inside for one reason. They are cut off by a sudden loud noise coming from the mansion and a bright glowing light shining through all the windows. George suddenly shouts, "That is the reason!" and starts running back inside. Having observed the mansion for 15 years, he has probably been expecting something like this to happen, or at least knows more about what is happening than anyone else. When you run back inside, you find the door of the room Celine and Damien were talking in wide open, with Celine standing in the doorway and glowing threateningly. In the chaos, the detective and the others manage to slam the door shut and the screen cuts to black. End of chapter 3. Okay, so this chapter was marginally shorter than the rest of the chapters, but it still holds some vital information to the story. Celine's arrival is sudden, but her character provides more insight into the weird vibes of the house and how she believes there is something bigger and darker happening around them. We also learn from Real Mark's video breakdown that Damien and Celine are siblings and that Mark and Celine used to be married. This is before she ran off with William and then eventually left all of it to study the occult. The lead with the groundskeeper is a strange dead end, and while the others are out of the house, something sinister happens in the room Damien and Celine were talking in. We are now entering the last chapter of Who Killed Markiplier, but the lore is far from over. Oh boy, are you guys not ready for this one. Opening back on the closed door, William rushes in demanding to know what happened to Damien and Celine. George claims that he knew something like this would happen and that both Damien and Celine are gone, most likely meaning dead. George then exits saying that the house is cursed and that they should all get out while they still can. The chef is justifiably freaked out and declares that he's quitting. The butler joins him in quitting and urges William to leave himself, but William is too worried about Damien and Celine and goes off to look for them. After everyone has left and you are alone, you hear a small "hey" whispered behind you. Hey. Creepy as hell, bro. I would be shitting myself if this was real life. When you turn, you find yourself in a weird void-like version of the world, in which you can hear voices of the past, present, and future echoing all around you. According to Real Mark, this is supposed to represent some kind of in-between dimension that all the characters pass through in order to teleport around the house. Oh, bruh, when did Stranger Things come out? When did Stranger Things come out? When referencing this place, Mark called it the Upside Down, which I thought maybe he had first claim to because this might have come out before Stranger Things, but no, Stranger Things came out a year before. So it's not the first time, but maybe he wrote the script before it came out, so who knows? I don't know the rights there. While walking through it, you hear a lot of familiar lines, but a few new lines stand out. From the future, we hear the detective's voice distortedly yelling,
"Talk about madness. Madness is stealing your best friend's life."
Due to William's constant mentioning of the word madness, we can assume that this is being yelled at William himself. The rest of the lines in this scene are all from earlier chapters, except for the last line, which is really important. This time we hear a distorted female voice, that being Celine's, say, and a responding male voice that says, Real Mark later explains that this is the last thing Celine and Damien said to each other before performing the ritual in that room that got them both killed. Exiting the strange in-between world, you find yourself in a room that the detective had apparently been using as a base for collecting evidence. There are newspaper clippings, notes, files, and pictures pinned all over the walls. Most of this evidence centers around William, as it seems that he is the detective's prime suspect in the case. William then enters the room looking for you, but he is instantly enraged by what he sees. He is upset that the detective has been keeping tabs on him in particular, and very offended by the fact that he is the prime suspect, considering he was Mark's friend. In an angry rage, William storms off to find him, muttering things like, "He did this," and "He took my friends from me," under his breath. Spoiler alert, but real Mark later says that he was so shocked seeing his own misdoings reflected back at him that he deludes himself into believing that someone else is the cause. Basically, he is irrationally blaming the detective because he can't face the truth. The two confront each other, each with a gun pointing at the other, and shout very threatening things at each other. William says, "This is madness," which prompts the detective to say the line that we heard earlier in the void.
This is madness!
Oh, you want to talk about madness? Madness is stealing your best friend's wife.
But then it continues.
Madness is squeezing him for cash to fund your own sick sexual exploits with that very woman.
Shut up!
Madness is plotting the death of your childhood friend because you can't handle the...
Yeah, bro. He shoots him. And then guess what? He shoots you as well. As you fall from the upper floor to the ground, you can hear William's distorted voice calling after you, saying, "It was an accident." You hit the ground and the screen cuts to black. Now here's where it all comes together. It's hard to describe, but you essentially are now in a weird death world, sort of like the in-between void you saw earlier. Mark's body falls out of the darkness and says the words,
It's not fair, is it?
An important line to remember for later. Mark's body disappears and Celine and Damien emerge from the darkness, Damien's body glowing blue and Celine's body glowing red. Damien tells you that Mark took everything from them and trapped them in this broken shell with no way out. Celine confirms this and says that while she assumed that the house was responsible for everything, it was really Mark who had orchestrated it all. Damien says that Mark had been planning this for years, and now...
That son of a bitch is out there walking around in my body!
He is cut off by Celine here, but this is a really important and very confusing thing to remember. They go on to explain that while you are trapped in this strange in-between death world, it doesn't necessarily mean the end, and that your body can still be used as a vessel. Essentially, they are asking to co-inhabit your body, because Damien says you can't survive on your own. Damien even says, "Just let me in."
Just let me in. We can fix this.
Which, if you recall, is a direct reference to the Freedom ending in A Date with Markiplier, where Darkiplier says, "You just need to let me in."
Just need to let me in.
You, as the viewer, nod your head in agreement, and the screen draws away as they seemingly enter your body. You know what I mean. When you open your eyes, the world has a strange blue and red glow to it, but that quickly fades away. Standing up, you turn to find the Colonel sitting there, watching you. His hat and jacket are off, revealing red suspenders over a yellow shirt, and he is holding Damien's cane. After you were shot, he apparently waited by your body all night, thinking. He's basically seeing the body that he watched all night just randomly stand up, and his mind snaps under this sight. He suddenly believes that no one is dead, and it was all just a joke, and he did nothing wrong. He leaves the cane on the table and stumbles off, shouting for Damien and Celine to come out, as if it's a joke. You turn to the cane, and as you reach for it, you see your hand flash from a woman's hand to a man's hand. When you look back up at the mirror before you, you see a very angry Damien staring back. He then cracks his neck, simultaneously cracking the mirror with a red and blue hue. Damien, now fully realized as Darkiplier, walks away from the mirror, leaving you trapped behind in the cracks forever. End of chapter 4! I'm sweating so bad. Holy shit. While that concludes the Who Killed Markiplier's story, there is still so much to unpack here. The main point of interest here is the weird death world scene and what it reveals about the characters. Now, a lot of this analysis and interpretation will be drawn from Real Mark's story breakdown video that he made, but a lot of it is really confusing, so bear with me. Let's go all the way back to chapter 1. Mark has seemingly invited everyone together, particularly Damien and William, to enact some sort of evil scheme. Now let's get into some background of why this is happening in the first place. When the three of them first broke up and stopped being friends, it left Mark alone in this house for a very long time, fuming over the betrayal he felt and the revenge he wished to enact. Now let's get one thing straight, the house is evil, like Shining level evil. With Mark alone in the house for so long, it fed off of his anger and hate and then slowly began to whisper to him. In the way that real Mark put it, he may have tried to kill himself before, but didn't actually die considering the house's strange nature. Because of this, he slowly started to lose it and began experimenting, seeing just how far he could push his body and still return to it. I'm never gonna memorize this whole sentence.
Stabbed, poisoned, beaten, strangled, and drowned. Stabbed, poisoned, beaten, strangled, and drowned. Stabbed, poisoned, beaten, strangled, and drowned. Stabbed, poisoned, beaten, strangled, and drowned.
This explains why the detective says that he was stabbed, poisoned, beaten, strangled, and drowned all before actually dying from a single shot. The more time Mark spent in the house, the more it whispered to him and tried to convince him to form a plan. So that night at the party was when the plan that he had formed was put into action. Let's rewind all the way back to that drunk montage that we saw at the very beginning. Remember when I told you to keep that in mind? Yeah, I'll explain it now. A lot of scenes are shown that are foreshadowing for the story. The detective is pointing fingers, everyone is mad at Mark, the detective and William fight, the detective punches you out, and Damien is the only one who comes to help you. But hidden in the obvious foreshadowing, the real truth of the night slowly becomes more clear. In one of the scenes, William loads a gun. He is then shown pointing that gun at the detective's head before pointing it at his own. Meanwhile, it keeps cutting to Mark at the poker table, making his play not seeming drunk at all. This is where it all went down, you could say. Sometime in the chaos of that night before you got punched out, Mark had invited William down into the basement for some wine. This connects to the broken bottle that the butler later shows you. He then proposed a game of Russian roulette to drunk William, saying that it would clear all the bad blood and show that they were meant to be friends. At this point, it is important to note that Mark is not drunk, only William is. He then quickly takes the gun from William's hand, puts a bullet in it, points it at William, and pulls the trigger. He does not spin the chamber, and the gun does not go off. William is mad at first, but Mark plays it off like it was just an act of faith and that it was meant to prove their friendship. Mark then eventually convinces William to try shooting him, saying that if it doesn't go off and doesn't kill him, then all will be forgiven. However, when Mark first placed the bullet in the gun, he placed it so that it wouldn't go off the first time, but would go off the second time. Again, he did not spin the chamber. So, as you can guess, when William points the gun at Mark and pulls the trigger, it goes off, effectively killing Mark. William, of course, fully panics and tries to move and hide the body. The whole time onward in the story, he has deluded himself into believing that he didn't do it or that it was some sort of accident not up to him. Now we know that this was really all part of Mark's plan from the beginning. This is where it gets complicated and a little theoretical, as there are a lot of holes in the story, but that's okay, because it's just fun, so whatever. Originally, Mark had planned for William to later kill Damien, and then Mark and the house would push Damien out of his body and take over it. So actually it's flipped. He intended for Damien to later kill William, the Colonel, not the other way around, because his whole motivation is to get revenge against William. So I don't really know where I got the other thing from, but the point is that plans had to change so that didn't happen. That plan had to change when Celine arrived. She was essentially the wrench in Mark's plan that he had to work around. Okay, again, I don't know how much of this is actually accurate to the intended story, but it's sort of a mix of what real Mark said in the breakdown and what theories and interpretation have kind of yielded. Anyways, knowing that she dabbled in the dark arts, Mark waited for her to perform that ritual where she tried to connect with the death world and had the house take over her body instead. This is why we see her standing menacingly in the doorway at the end of chapter 3. The house in Celine's body then kills Damien, allowing Mark to enter Damien's body. This is what he wanted all along, a form of revenge by taking over Damien's body and leaving him stranded in the death world, and starting anew in a new body that looked similar to his. He finally pushed Damien and Celine's souls, you could say, into Mark's fucked up dead body, essentially leaving them behind and trapped in the death world forever. The idea behind trapping them in Mark's old body was that it was so fucked up from all the things that he had done to it before that it couldn't possibly be used again. Although, to be completely honest, I'm not entirely sure why they couldn't re-inhabit Celine's body, or if the house ever left Celine's body, or like what happened with that, but you know what, who cares? Like, it's not that important, I'm sure. This whole situation explains why Damien says, now he's walking around in my body when you encounter him in the death world. When Damien and Celine are speaking to you in that final Death World scene, it's not just them anymore. The house has sort of gotten to them as well. That's why when they speak to you, you can hear a sort of echo and background to their words. As sincere as they both seem in this interaction, they are both practically as hellbent on revenge as Mark was in this moment. This is why at the end, when you look in the mirror, you are seeing a different person reflected back at you, the worst qualities of both of them, but particularly Damien. And this forms the joint entity known as Darkiplier. You are entirely pushed out of your own body, and Darkiplier leaves to go enact revenge on Mark, now in Damien's body. My personal theory is that this is why Darkiplier is always showing up across Mark's creations, like A Date with Markiplier and A Heist with Markiplier. He is essentially chasing Mark down for revenge. And don't forget about William. Mark has successfully gotten his revenge on him by driving him to complete madness. He was already sort of losing it when he inadvertently killed Mark, but the ending where you get up off of the ground after being seemingly dead for hours is his breaking point. His red suspenders and mustache will eventually fade to pink over the years, and he will take on the new persona of Wilford Warfstache. And that is Who Killed Markiplier. There's so much that I could say about Who Killed Markiplier as a whole, since it is kind of the backbone for a lot of this lore and story that Mark created. I acknowledge that it's a little confusing, especially if you watch it without this background knowledge, because a lot of the story is more prevalent in Mark's writing than actually on screen. But hey, that's what had 13-year-old me so invested. It was fun to figure out. Here's a random clip from the behind the scenes episode where Mark basically jokingly sums up everything that I just explained.
Here's a secret. I'm trying to ruin the Colonel's life, who's actually Warfstache.
Yeah, it went in my sock and I just
and I'm going to steal his body because he ran off with my wife. And it's all his fault and definitely not her choice. So, yeah, she must have gone crazy or something to leave me. So, but things don't go right, and then I do die, but I've died lots of times. I come back all the time. It's great. Beat death. That's a quick thing. So then in the end, I take over the mayor's body, but that's not Darkiplier. Darkiplier is the mayor. Spirit in my body, my broken, bloody body. He wants to go back and he wants revenge. That's the whole crux of the story. Makes sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Now we know where Darkiplier came from and what started Wilford Warfstache's decline into madness, but there is still so much more to discuss.
The Colonel was always one for the eccentrics, but his latest persona takes the entire cake shop. Wilford, mother-loving, Warfstache.
Almost a year later, on August 5th of 2018, Mark released a seemingly random 20-minute video titled Wilford Mother-Loving Warfstache. This was meant to be a sort of add-on to the Who Killed Markiplier series and also an expansion on the backstory of Wilford Warfstache. This story follows the detective seemingly years after the events of Who Killed Markiplier with a 70s sort of noir style to it. According to the detective's internal monologue, we learn that he has been trying to track down William, aka Wilford Warfstache, for years in order to get justice for his crimes committed in Who Killed Markiplier. As he says, after countless close calls, he believes that he has finally cornered him at a disco club. And sure enough, there he is, absolutely boogieing down on stage. I love that scene, it's so fucking funny. This whole sequence is very comedic and very entertaining. The detective fires his gun to clear everyone out of the room and points it at William, telling him to put his hands up or put them down, but the whole time William is not really taking it seriously. He literally dances circles around him instead. When William finally acknowledges the detective, he doesn't seem to recognize him. The detective then tases him out of frustration, and it cuts to the two of them in a car with the detective making vague threats about him going away for a long time. But he also admits in his internal monologue that he plans to get some answers out of William first. His internal monologue continues, and we get this scene.
Holy shit, that was close.
We could have taken them.
What the hell does that have to do with...
How did you... How are you... How many fingers am I holding up?
4.
Aardvark. Pumpernickel.
What are you doing?
Calabasas.
Are you okay?
How are you in my head?
Why are you shouting?
Get out of my head!
You're still shouting!
Panicked, the detective tases William again, and he awakes back in the detective's office. The detective says no more games and starts making accusations at William again. William, or Wilford as I will now continue to call him, still doesn't recognize the detective or acknowledge any of the crimes that he says he has committed. To this, the detective starts throwing his past aliases at him. William J. Butterfield, which was his name in Who Killed Markiplier, Wilson Jackson Bartholomew III. What's happening? What was that? Let's redo that. William J. Butterfield, which was his name in Who Killed Markiplier, Wilson Jackson Bartholomew III, and Winkleheimer. Hilarious. Seeing the detective's passion and anger over this case, Wilford slowly begins to recognize him. This is where we learn that the detective's real name is Abe, as he slowly recalls who he is and what he's talking about. He wasn't pretending to not know Abe, he genuinely didn't remember him because to him it had been such a long time and he has been so deep in madness for so long. As the conversation continues, Wilford begins to seemingly teleport around the room looking at the evidence on the walls. Abe is rightfully confused and upset, demanding to know how Wilford is moving around like that, all while Wilford looks at the photos and reminisces on old times. After reminiscing on more of the photos and making some strange comments about future events and things that haven't happened yet, Wilford starts walking towards Abe. This causes the detective to panic and shoot the gun he's holding. Seems very familiar. However, Wilford seems unaffected by this. He essentially tells the gun to shush, very comedic, and Abe demands to know what the hell is going on. Wilford admits that he honestly doesn't know either. He does, however, say that he remembers something that he needs to give Abe after all these years.
I'm sorry.
Wilford then teleports away again, to which we get this scene where I think Mick, the actor who plays the detective, is so amazing. I just have to show you this whole scene.
That's the beauty of it.
Beauty. What about any of this is beautiful to you? What kind of sick, twisted son of a bitch thinks any of this is beautiful?
Now, what did we say about name calls?
You killed people! So many people! You killed my friends! You killed my partner! You shot me!
Now, it seems to me like you're trying to paint me as the bad guy.
You are the bad guy!
Okay, well...
After this display of emotion, Wilford realizes the seriousness of what is going on and urges the detective to recall their last closest encounter. Abe says that's easy and begins to describe a moment, but falters, unable to recall it fully. He runs around the room trying to recall memories that seem to be on the tip of his tongue, but he just can't quite remember. Abe tries to recall something that he thinks happened 3 years ago, to which Wilford prompts him to remember what year it was 3 years ago. Abe falters again as he is unable to recall what year they are even in. Defeated, Abe sits down in a chair and genuinely asks Wilford if he is crazy. Then we get this scene, which is my personal favorite in the whole video.
My friend, you are not crazy. Don't let anyone ever tell you that you're crazy. You're just too focused on the minutiae of it, the details, the who killed who, the who slept with who. You're not focusing on the big picture.
It's impossible to know things that haven't happened yet.
Yes, exactly. Just like it's impossible to survive a bullet through the heart.
From the very beginning of the video, it already kind of urges you to wonder if Abe really survived the bullet wound through the heart, but this reveals that he in fact did not, and has been dead or in some sort of purgatory the whole time. I would like to note that in this scene where Wilford leans closer to the detective, you can see that the ends of his mustache are slowly turning pink, a defining feature of Wilford Warstash as a fully realized character later on. Also, as the camera pans down to reveal the gunshot wound in Abe's chest, you can hear an echoing shot like at the end of Who Killed Markiplier, along with the slow build-up of the piano music from the finale of Who Killed Markiplier. Abe starts to drift off in shock, but Wilford pulls him back, saying,
Life needed a bit of madness, but why should death be any different?
Life needed a bit of madness, but why should death be any different? It ties in that reoccurring life motto that we heard so often in Who Killed Markiplier, but also tying in a comment about death. Suddenly, the scene draws back, and Wilford and Abe are standing back in the disco club in front of a crowd of people all wearing white masks with pink mustaches. Creepy as hell, actually. The video ends with Abe essentially letting go and dancing with Wilford as the credits roll. As serious as a lot of the story is, there are so many comedic bits in this video that make it so fun to watch. I just have to praise the filming and the acting in Wilford Mother-Loving Warstash, because I feel like it is the first time that you really see Mark create a movie-level piece of art that I really recommend everyone go watch. Not to say that his previous creations weren't as amazing, but this was really a step up that I think anyone could appreciate. As to the interpretation of this video specifically, I think it's a little open-ended. I personally like to believe that it was a sort of purgatory that Abe was going to in order to come to terms with the events that happened in Who Killed Markiplier and let go of his anger towards Wilford. Wilford as a character is sort of an otherworldly being who can kind of come and go as he pleases, which is why I like to believe that he was, in a sense, actually there, or actually in Abe's mind. Not necessarily dead, but just kind of existing. Regardless, I think it gives a really satisfying conclusion to the detective as a character, and a great opportunity for Mick to showcase his amazing acting. It also lets us see a earlier version of Wilford Warstash, not completely lost to the madness, but still able to recall past events, and I think that that is really interesting. Whatever your interpretation, I believe it was an excellent addition to the overall lore, and everyone should go see it. There is still, however, one more in-between addition to discuss before we move forward with the stories. On May 12th of 2019, Mark released another 20-minute or so video titled Damien. This story takes on a completely different style than what we've seen before, being that it is animated. In Mark's story breakdown of this video, he says he actually came up for the idea of Damien before he created Wilford Mother-Loving Warstash. In fact, on August 20th of 2018, only 15 days after the release of Wilford Mother-Loving Warstash, Mark released an ominous 32-second video, much like the ones that spawned Darkiplier. It was called Go Back to Sleep, where it showed brief clips of a TV screen, a snowy forest, and an old cabin, all while a deep voice in the background said, "Go back to sleep." All of this alludes to things that appear in Damien all a year before it even comes out. The video Damien opens on an overhead shot of an endless snowy forest. In this forest, Damien is shown chopping down a tree and cutting it up for firewood. He hauls this wood a very long way across the snowy plain and back to an old cabin. Celine is inside watching and waiting for him to come back. They have this very sibling-like back and forth before Damien mentions that he saw a small pink flower today. He believes it could be a sign that winter is almost over, but Celine doubts that he even saw it in the first place and brushes it off. Grabbing a gun from the mantle, she leaves to go hunting, not before telling Damien that he should get some sleep because he looks tired. That night, Damien dreams of the flower in the forest, hearing echoes of voices off in the distance. The voices recognizable to us as Abe's from Wilford Mother-Loving Warstash, accusing Wilford of killing people.
You killed people! So many people!
Who's there?
The emergence of a strange pink flower and the echoing of these lines from Wilford Mother-Loving Warstash suggests that some of the events from this are spilling over into Damien's world. We cut from this scene to Damien once again bringing back wood from the forest. The scene follows in exactly the same way, with the sibling bickering and Damien mentioning the flower, but he slowly begins to realize this feels familiar and has happened before. Celine then leaves to hunt once again, urging Damien to get more sleep. What is being shown here is essentially an endless time loop where Damien gets wood every day and Celine hunts while Damien sleeps. According to Real Mark's breakdown of this scene, Celine does not sleep and instead goes out hunting for Actor Mark every night. After Celine leaves, Damien notices a mirror in the cabin that wasn't there before. He doesn't see his own reflection at first, but then is suddenly face to face with a zombie-like version of himself. He then hears an ominous voice say, "You aren't quite feeling like yourself, are you?" Before he shuts his eyes, and then the voice says again, "It's time to wake up, Damien." When he opens his eyes again, he is back in the snowy forest, and he can hear Celine off in the distance calling for him. Damien runs towards the voice until he reaches a frozen lake where he sees a figure that has seemingly fallen through the ice. He runs to pull the figure that he thinks is Celine out of the ice, only to find that it is that strange zombie thing again. He hears the voice say, "It's not fair, isn't it?" and the zombie pulls him under into the darkness. As he sinks, you can hear echoes of lines from Who Killed Markiplier and Wilfred Mother-Loving Warfstache. Then, Damien is suddenly standing in the cabin again. When he turns behind him, Actor Mark is there, standing in front of what seems like a giant crack in glass holding back water. Actor Mark speaks familiar with Damien, saying that it took him a while to find him. Damien doesn't recognize who's speaking at first, but then slowly begins to realize it's Mark. Damien demands answers, and Mark speaks of the events of Who Killed Markiplier, admitting that some plans went wrong along the way. This is the first conversation that we see happening with Actor Mark, the real Actor Mark, not the facade that he was putting up at the party. Actor Mark says that he sees himself as the hero, and he wishes to mold Damien into the villain. Actor Mark is a narcissist. He blames Celine and everyone else for what happened and sees his revenge as heroic justice. Damien tells Mark to just go away and let him live his life in peace, to which Mark laughs at this because Damien still doesn't realize the truth of what's going on. He then tells Damien again, "It's time to wake up." Suddenly, Celine bursts in and without a second thought throws an axe right into Actor Mark's body. However, Mark is not really there and he laughs as he evaporates and melts away. Damien is now even more confused and demands Celine give him answers. Celine admits that she had only created this place to protect him, as the time loop was created by her to protect Damien from the truth and allow him to sleep while she hunted for Mark. Admittedly, this was kind of pointless because she herself was still trapped in that same time loop. The random appearance of the small pink flower is what caused the world to become offset, and Mark's intrusion was starting to break it completely. Damien frustratedly admits that he's tired of being a pawn in other people's games and he just wants to make a choice for himself. Damien's life motto was, "Life is ours to choose," and yet he hasn't had much choice in anything so far. Damien then asks Celine if he is dead, to which Celine defiantly says no.
Celine, am I dead?
No! More cracks appear in the metaphorical glass, and Celine realizes that their world is falling apart. Damien wants to finally choose something for himself and says that he will protect her while she finally rests. Celine says that doing so will change him, to which Damien says that's okay.
He did say he wanted me to be the villain. Maybe he should be more careful with his wishes.
The water then explodes from the cracks, flooding the cabin and spilling outside. The water melts away some of the snow to reveal the fresh ground of spring underneath. Symbolism! Mark said that when he created Damien, he intended for it to be the final installment in the Who Killed Markiplier storyline, and I feel like it does exactly that. Now, in a way, a lot of what happens in Damien is very similar to what happens in Wilfred Mother-Loving Warfstache. The characters are in some sort of purgatory, and they must navigate through it to sort of come to terms with what happened in Who Killed Markiplier. Through Damien, we get to see more exploration of Celine's character as the stronger, older sister type who intends to protect her brother no matter what. Damien's interaction with Actor Mark allows us to see Mark's true character for the first time and his motivations of wanting Damien to be the villain while he remains the hero. Damien essentially accepts this role when he becomes Darkiplier. Now let's talk about where this story takes place in the timeline and what it all means. In the video breakdown, Real Mark says that much like in Wilfred Mother-Loving Warfstache, time is not linear, And while Damien seems to be happening over the course of many years, it is actually only happening in one moment. According to Real Mark, this moment was right after you in Who Killed Markiplier agreed to allow Celine and Damien into your body. In the ending scene, when you first reach for the cane, your hand is a woman's. This is because Celine has control while Damien sleeps. When the hand flashes and changes to a man's hand, this is because Celine has surrendered control over to Damien while she sleeps. Actor Mark's appearance in Celine and Damien's purgatory is much like Wilford's appearance in Abe's, in that they are not physically there per se, but their presence is almost otherworldly and definitely there. Actor Mark wanted to push Damien into becoming the villain, and he succeeded, which is why you see Darkiplier reflected in the mirror at the end of Who Killed Markiplier. I believe this is all quite a perfect way to wrap up the story that Mark had created. Real Mark concludes this by saying that the characters will go on to exist in his creations exactly as they are as a result of these events. In the end, they are all just characters, and they will always play the part they were written to play. In an abstract way, all of these characters are just different representations of Mark himself, as he has said that he feels all the characters represent different aspects of his personality, and the house represents his mind where he comes up with all these stories. I think this truly encapsulates the fun of how the story is really just a story. But this story doesn't end quite yet. After Damien came out in May, congrats, Mark created a new choose-your-own-adventure style experience that was released on October, 30th of 2019, called A Heist with Markiplier. Fun fact, I was so excited about the release of this particular series that I counted down the days to hours of its release. As soon as it came out, I watched and played it all on the live premiere in the middle of my freshman Earth and Space Science class. Yeah, I was a great student. Now this project is huge, and I do not intend to explain every aspect of it, especially because it is more fun to go play on your own and find every ending. I know I did. I was obsessed. I'm pretty sure I found every ending within that day. And the code, don't forget the code. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry, I'm gonna get to it. However, I will explain the parts that are relevant to the lore in detail. If you follow the choice path in the beginning titled All Sneaky Like, you will then go down into the tunnels and choose the option Dark Tunnel. You will then go through many scenarios in which, let's call him Heist Mark, will suggest that you split up. Then choose the Don't Split Up option the first 2 times prompted, and on the third, click Split Up. After choosing this, you will look back to find Heist Mark has vanished and the hallway before you is now dark and ominous. As you walk down this hallway, portraits of characters from Who Killed Markiplier with their eyes crossed out will slowly light up on each side of the hallway one by one. As each portrait lights up, you can hear an echo of a line they said in Who Killed Markiplier. At the reveal of each portrait, your phone will buzz and you lift it up to show strange text from an unknown number. As they show up, it reads as follows. Aren't you tired of it? Don't you feel like you're running in circles? No one seems to question it. But I thought you'd see through it. The second to last portrait is of Wilford with a pink mustache painted over his photo. The ones that appear before that are the chefs, the butlers, and the detectives. Note that there is no portrait of Damien or Celine. The last one at the very end of the hallway is of actor Mark, with his voice echoing the speech he gave before the party that started it all. His picture slowly disintegrates before you as you hear Darkiplier's voice say,
Same snake, different skin.
You slowly turn around to, of course, face Darkiplier. He says that he sees you trapped in Mark's game, perpetually plunging down the rabbit holes of his stories. This is because you are plunging down the rabbit holes of his stories. We keep coming back to his creations to watch it and experience it and go along with it, and Darkiplier all the while is chasing him through it. He says something about how you might have met 100 times already, which I think is simply just a reference to repeating paths and coming back to that moment multiple times over. Like I did when I was researching and revisiting this. Darkiplier recognizes that you probably want answers, and says that maybe he will give them to you. After all,
games were always his forte.
Also, I really want to note a line that he says here about the mysterious box you stole during the heist, where he says, "So much trouble, all for something so small."
So much trouble. All for something so small.
Hold on to that for a bit. Darkiplier then asks if you want to know the truth of what's inside the box, not the lies he's told you. Obviously, you do, and he says that he has hidden codes throughout the whole heist that will lead you to the truth. This has been figured out for forever now, but these codes would lead you to a behind-the-scenes video. Now you can just find it by looking it up on YouTube, but at the time, this was so fun. The scene then slowly zooms out and you appear in front of the museum you started in, this time alone. This is ending 31 of 31, and it's called Ignorance is Bliss. This ending mostly pays homage to the events of Who Killed Markiplier and acts as a little detail in the story, but I feel like it has some important aspects to it. It is the first time that we see Darkiplier appear in one of Mark's creations since the release of Who Killed Markiplier, now with all of the backstory to him as well. I personally think the same snake, different skin line is such an important piece of dialogue, especially now that you know the truth of what happened. On the other side of things, there is also a way to encounter Wilford Warfstache in Heist. If you go down a very long chain of paths that I'm not even going to try to repeat because it's too complicated, you will eventually be faced with the choice between Shoot Wade and Open Box. I don't know, man, you have to watch it to understand that. But anyway, if you pick the Open Box option, the thing will start rewinding time. It'll speed backwards through all of the parts of Heist that you just saw, but eventually it'll start going too far back to old interviews with the old version of Wilford Warfstache. Suddenly, Wilford intrudes and stops you from going back any further. In this interaction, Wilford's mustache is completely pink and he acts so goofy and all over the place, it would suggest that this takes place fully after the events of Wilford Mother-Loving Warfstache. He immediately scolds you for being late to an interview he apparently scheduled you for. Specifically, he says,
"You're late. And the only thing I hate more than people showing up late for their interview is people showing up early. And you're on the verge of doing both."
He then proceeds to humorously conduct an interview, but is cut short by some sort of director or set person. In the end, he gives you a bell and tells you to ring it if you ever need him. Almost right after he is pulled away and has disappeared completely, you ring the bell. The screen cuts to black, showing the ending 16 of 31, the interview. So again, I don't think there's much here that is new, aside from the comment about being simultaneously late and early, that you need to remember for later. But I still think that this is all very fun, especially now with the context of backstory. It is here that we're seeing Wilford fully realized as Wilford Warfstache with the completely pink mustache and the all-over-the-place personality. At this point, he is completely mad, but at the same time, he's kind of just vibing, just kind of going along and having fun, not really holding on to anything, unlike Darkiplier. We'll come back to that line about being simultaneously late and early in the context of Mark's next massive choose-your-own-adventure story called In Space with Markiplier.
You did this, Captain. We followed you to the end of the universe.
You're just as bad as him.
We trusted you, Captain.
Trusted you.
Those people put their lives in your hands.
You're too weak to do this job.
All those colonists. That's on you.
We're sure about you. We trusted you. I trusted you, Captain.
I'm not going to explain too much about the story of Space yet, but I am going to explain how a lot of what we just talked about with the details in Heist connects to some of the things that are shown in Space. Specifically, Wilford's appearance across both A Heist with Markiplier and In Space with Markiplier. In part 1 of In Space with Markiplier, that aired on August 4th of 2022, you can find Wilford walking around the ship by choosing a path that leads you to find Easter eggs. I say a path because there's not really any one defined way to get to certain scenarios because space is kind of a mess of different paths and different stories that we'll get to soon. Wilford spots you and criticizes you for looking for Easter eggs too early and tells you to come back in part 2. So now let's jump to part 2 of In Space with Markiplier, which came out on May 2nd of 2022, almost a month later. In this part, you once again encounter Wilford walking around the ship, but this time he is walking back from a scene that looks and sounds very familiar. In the background, you can even hear lines from Wilford Mother-Loving Warstash of Wilford and Abe arguing in the disco club.
You. Hey! How do I recognize you? Oh, it's you. Is it that time already? Oh, let's chat over here.
Wilford tells you to pay them no mind and that they're still figuring themselves out. He then insists that he schedule an appointment for an interview with you and then settles on the date of October 30th, 2019. And boom, that's how you are simultaneously late and early to your interview in A Heist with Markiplier. But the importance of the In Space with Markiplier story doesn't just end there. The story of In Space with Markiplier is very apart from the rest of the lore that we have developed so far with Actor Mark, Darkiplier, and Wilford, but it takes on a new approach to a new story that I think is also very interesting and worth mentioning. In a lot of ways, Space is very similar to Heist, but it is actually completely different in that Heist has many paths and many endings that you can seek out and find, while Space has so many paths, but technically only one ending. The main storyline of Heist, you could say, does not directly relate to the main storyline in Space, but one detail that is reoccurring in both is the mysterious box. Heist branches out into many different storylines with many different endings, but throughout each, the box can contain different things. It could be anything from a useful tool you really needed, a gun, a time-traveling device, or a behind-the-scenes video. But the point is that it is otherworldly, and it alters to what you need in the storyline or that certain path. Heist at its core is really just a heist. It's fun, it gets off track, but that's the point. In Space with Markiplier is much harder to sum up as a whole, considering that paths in Part 1 and Part 2 make up over 3 hours worth of content as a whole, and that the story contains so many elements of time travel it's hard to keep track. For that reason, I will explain the general plot and the overarching story, and all of the other details you will have to find out for yourself by watching it. The general plot is that you are the new captain of a spaceship called the Invincible 2, carrying thousands of people across space to a new planet to colonize. Engineer Mark, as he is called, is basically your companion that accompanies you on this adventure. Things start to go wrong when a wormhole suddenly forms in the middle of your ship caused by some sort of paradox, and things start to get crazy. Engineer Mark tells you that you need to stabilize the ship and fix the wormhole by getting to the warp core. That's kind of your goal of this adventure. However, once the chaos begins, if at any point you die while making your choices, the ship will explode and you will be sent to a different universe or parallel reality where things can range from being slightly different to very different. It's important to note that every time you die, you are essentially creating hundreds of thousands of deaths in that universe. Now, the point of the story isn't to avoid this happening, because there kind of is no way to. However, what is important is that the wormhole is causing this to repeat in different realities, as you choose different choices and inevitably fail in almost all of them. As you do go down all of these different paths, you eventually do find the warp core in a weird empty realm with it constantly repeating,
"Paradox detected. Requesting suitable host."
It then attaches a small piece of the warp core, a crystal, to your hand, saying,
"Please resolve paradox. Please resolve."
You are then sent back to another reality once again, but this time the crystal helps you stabilize the world slightly as you continue forward. From here on out, the crystal will be used to help you switch universes without actually having to die to get there. When you do finally reach the warp core again, you find an old version of Engineer Mark that tries to kill you because he thinks that you are responsible for the millions of deaths across the multiverse. But instead of killing you, he decides that the best course of action is to basically reset everything, hoping to undo all that was done and make the universe right again. However, this does not actually seem like a good solution, as the warp core begins to power up again and then seemingly explodes or reacts negatively in some way to this request. This concludes Part 1 and leads into Part 2. In Part 2, the universe is reset, but everything is far from fixed. If anything, it's worse, and things have gone from confusing to nonsensical. It's a total mess, but it's so entertaining, and there are plenty more paths to stumble down upon. After navigating down all these new paths, you will eventually come face to face with Old Man Mark again. This time he is much more somber, Jesus Christ, I sound like I'm from 2013. As he has fully realized that it was not your fault and that you didn't intend for any of this. Mid-conversation, he suddenly realizes something, and just before you are transported to yet another universe, he tells you to stop him from going back. More specifically, he meant that you needed to stop him from the past from going back to try and fix everything. Once again, you go through more fun paths experiencing the ridiculousness of all the different realities before you are once again face to face with Old Man Mark. This time the setting is much more dark and sad, and he tells you that it's okay you couldn't fix everything, and that he is content with the end because after all, everything ends.
Everything has to end, Captain. It has to.
He's got a gun! It's
Doesn't
all
matter how
better, Lisa.
tightly you hold on to things, they'll still just slip right through your fingers. You'll always make mistakes. You have to. And that's okay. I just wish I learned that sooner. For what it's worth, I'm glad I got to share this adventure with you.
He disappears and you walk out of the room to find yourself finally back in the warp core room again. But this time, you see a time lapse of young engineer Mark that reveals he was actually the one who built the warp core in the first place, thinking that he was rebuilding it after you destroyed it. You then turn to get knocked the fuck out by young engineer Mark. He takes the warp device, the crystal, from your wrists and places it in the warp core, saying that he's going to fix everything. However, you distract him momentarily and a wormhole appears trying to suck Mark in. He tells you to let go so he can go back and fix everything.
God, I wish I thought of a fake hand or something. Please! This is it! This is the end of everything! Everyone that ever existed is gonna get wiped out unless you let me go! Captain! Please!
But if you do this, it'll simply send you back to the beginning, fixing nothing. If you hold on to Mark and instead throw the crystal into the wormhole, the warp core stabilizes, saying paradox resolved. Mark is angry and confused, but then slowly realizes that he was the one who built the warp core in the first place, and that if he never goes back to try and fix everything, then the paradox never begins and the warp core never explodes. Coming to terms with this, the timeline resets and you are back on the Invincible 2 just like in the beginning, with everything finally back to normal. Credits roll, everything is nice and wrapped up. But not quite. If you wait till the very end, you see a scene with the crystal lying on the ground as a figure that looks like Darkiplier picks it up, saying,
So much trouble. All for something so small.
"Sounds familiar!" And then it really ends. I love In Space with Markiplier, and there's so much more to it than what I just messily explained. It's really the kind of thing that you have to experience for yourself, so please, please, please go check it out on your own time. Anyways, I know that was really confusing with a lot of multiversal and timeline stuff, and honestly, I don't even quite understand it fully myself, but I'll do my best to recap it. The main thing is what the warp core crystal has to do with Heist. In space, the crystal is basically a small part of the warp core and holds similar wormhole properties. To my knowledge, this has not been verbally confirmed, but it is heavily implied that this crystal is the same one that you can see on the box in A Heist with Markiplier. This would explain why, in Heist, the contents of the box alter depending on which path you choose. Timeline-wise, it is very debated where space falls in relation to Heist. However, many people speculate that because Mark asks you on a date in space, and then confirms that he has already asked you on said date in Heist, that space comes before Heist in the timeline. This would suggest that because Darkiplier is the one who picks up the crystal at the end of space, that he might have had something to do with its creation in Heist. Also, in one of the endings of A Heist with Markiplier, Heist Mark asks you, "So, do you want to go on that date?" implying that a date with Markiplier would follow right after A Heist with Markiplier. I think this is logical, but at the same time, Mark has always said that his cinematic universe doesn't necessarily flow in a straight line, and it's best not to read into it too much. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not about the clues or the lore or the timeline, it's about enjoying the story that was put in front of you and feeling like you're a part of it. So I've been doing this whole video off of a script, but let me just go off of script for this ending. I am not the expert on the Markiplier lore by a long shot. I am sure there are so many more people out there that have found little details that I missed or understand more about it than I do. But it's something that I enjoy talking about and enjoyed researching, so this was kind of just for fun. Obviously, a lot of this is very silly, but I am very inspired by Mark's drive and his story-making commitment, even with things as silly as alternate personalities in YouTube lore. He's moved on to even bigger and better creations like Iron Lung, which I hope to see come out soon. There's something to be said for the progress that he made from these small stories. I mean, beginning with something as simple as a date with Markiplier that was filmed among his friends, to something as huge and complex as Space, filmed with professional equipment and actors from all over. His potential was always there, and it only grew as he became more confident in his abilities and the people around him. I find it all very inspiring, and I hope that I can be like that in the future too. Thank you if you've made it all the way through this. I know it's not the most entertaining of video essays, as it's a lot of just me talking about a seemingly silly subject, but I'm genuinely passionate about it, and I'm glad that I get to share it with people that might be passionate about it as well. Or maybe you're learning something new. I don't know. Anyways, that's enough from me. Please go check out Markiplier on YouTube and any other platform. Please, please, please go experience a date with Markiplier, Who Killed Markiplier, A Heist with Markiplier, In Space with Markiplier, and of course Damien and Wilfred Mother-Loving Warstash. They're all amazing in their own right, and everyone should go check them out after this. Please, it's worth it. Oh, how does Mark do his outro? And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!
Hey!
Oh, God. Was that good?